every country on earth is in debt. The United States owes more than $38 trillion, dollars, the highest figure in its history. Japan, $9 trillion. The European Union, about $14 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia and export powerhouses like Germany and China owe large amounts of debt. Is it possible for all these countries to be in debt? How did this system come into place during this modern era? Who benefits from this system? Does everyone benefit equally? There isn't a single mastermind or hidden empire that secretly holds all the money. Debt is largely owed to itself. Here, we will go through the history of debt and uncover some of its modern-day implications and address the role that you play within this system. National debt didn't start with bad budgeting. It started with emergencies. Back in 1694, England needed money to fight France and didn't have enough gold on hand. So instead of raising taxes all at once, the government borrowed from merchants and promised to pay them interest over time, backed by future tax revenue. To manage this, the Bank of England was created. That idea turned out to be incredibly powerful. It meant governments could spend now and pay later, and lenders got something valuable in return, a government-backed claim that could be bought, sold, or passed on. That's where government bonds come from. Other countries quickly copied the model. France, the Netherlands, and eventually the United States all used debt to fund wars, infrastructure, and expansion. Over time, borrowing stopped being a sign of failure. It became a sign that a government was trusted. A lot of this hinges on central banks. They don't just set interest rates, they shape how debt functions. When a central bank buys government bonds, it creates new base money in exchange. That money enters the economy through financial institutions. Not all money is government debt, but most modern money shows up because credit was created somewhere first. That's not a flaw. It's how modern economies expand. Fast forward a few centuries, and debt isn't a backup plan. It's just how the system runs. Governments borrow continuously, banks lend continuously, and most people are involved without really thinking about it, through taxes, pensions, savings accounts, and insurance. So, who actually holds all this debt? Let's use the US as an example. The US owes about $38 trillion. Dollars. Roughly half of that is publicly held, meaning it's owned by investors rather than other government accounts. About two-thirds of those investors are American institutions, banks, pension funds, insurance companies, mutual funds, and the Federal Reserve. The rest is held overseas. Japan is the largest foreign holder. China comes next, then countries like the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people say the US is in debt to China, that's technically true, but it's a small slice of the picture as most US debt is owed within its own financial system. In the US, taxes help pay interest. That interest ends up in retirement funds. And then the Federal Reserve sometimes buys government bonds by creating new base money. It sounds circular because it is. Before we talk about today's numbers, it helps to zoom out because the United States has gone through massive debt cycles before. In fact, high debt is not unusual in American history. It just tends to show up during very specific moments. The first spike came during the Revolutionary War. The young country borrowed heavily to fund independence, then again during the Civil War. Debt surged to preserve the Union, but the largest spike in U.S. history came during World War II. By 1946, federal debt had climbed to around 120% of GDP, higher than it is today as a share of the economy. And yet, there was no collapse. Why? Because the U.S. economy grew rapidly in the decades that followed. Strong industrial expansion, rising productivity, population growth, all of it made the debt smaller relative to the economy. The government didn't pay it all off in the dramatic sense. Growth simply outpaced it. Then something changed. Starting in the 1980s, the U.S. entered a long period of persistent deficits, driven by tax cuts, military spending, entitlement growth, financial crises, and eventually the COVID response. Debt began rising not just during wars, but during peacetime. Today's $38 trillion didn't appear overnight. It's the cumulative result of war spending, economic stimulus recessions, tax policy demographics, and compound interest over decades. Seen this way, U.S. debt isn't a sudden emergency. It's a long historical pattern shaped by crises, then stabilized by growth. The question now isn't why is there debt? It's whether future growth can keep doing what past growth did, which leads us to modern day U.S. politics. The return of tariffs in U.S. politics came with the goals of taxing imports, protecting domestic industry, bringing money back home. Tariffs sound simple, right? But in a world built on interconnected debt, tariffs don't just change trade, they change who absorbs economic pressure. When the U.S. raises tariffs, it's not just foreign companies that feel it. Importers pay higher costs, prices rise for consumers, supply chains adjust. Other countries respond with their own tariffs. And because government debt relies on steady growth, steady trade, and steady confidence, tariffs can slow the very system that makes large debts manageable in the first place. On one hand, debt heavy economies need growth, global trade, and investor confidence. On the other, voters feel squeezed by globalization and rising inequality and want protection. Tariffs become a political response to a financial system problem. They don't eliminate debt, they redistribute pressure, and often they shift costs quietly from balance sheets to prices, from governments to households. This doesn't mean tariffs are wrong or right. It means that in a debt driven system, every policy choice has second order effects. When growth slows, governments can't just pay less debt. They have to choose who feels the slowdown first. Japan holds U.S. bonds. The U.S. lends through institutions like the IMF. Europe lends through the World Bank. Developing countries hold foreign exchange reserves in Western bonds. Everyone is connected through promises. The system works as long as those promises are considered reliable. Debt on its own doesn't sink countries. What matters is whether an economy grows faster than the interest it owes. That's why Japan can sustain debt above 230% of GDP while paying very low interest, and why Greece ran into trouble with much lower debt levels. Growth matters, interest rates matter, and inflation quietly plays a role too. Moderate inflation reduces the real value of existing debt over time. It's not repayment, it's gradual erosion. Governments rarely talk about it directly, but it's one reason debt doesn't automatically spiral out of control. Problems show up when growth slows or confidence drops. In Greece, international bailouts came with strict conditions. In Argentina, defaults became recurring. In Sri Lanka, foreign currency shortages led to fuel and food crises. Organizations like the IMF step in to stabilize situations, but those interventions often come with serious social costs. Debts get restructured, new loans replace old ones. And then the system keeps going because sovereign debt isn't designed to disappear, it's designed to be managed over time. And this is where the story turns uncomfortable. When we say we owe it to ourselves, that's only partly true. Interest payments don't circulate evenly. They flow upward from workers and taxpayers to institutions and asset holders. As shown by the U.S. tariffs, those who own debt are rewarded. Those who service it pay the rent. That's why global inequality and global indebtedness rise together. From households to nations, the pattern repeats. Debt itself isn't bad, and creditors aren't villains, but the structure does tend to reward entities who already own a share of the future. So if every country is in debt, who's the creditor? Most of the time, it's the system itself and everyone inside it. Modern finance turned promises into something tradable. Governments issue them, banks expand them, investors hold them. Ordinary people rely on them. Debt no longer just means owing money. It means participating in how the modern economy works. As long as growth continues and trust holds, the system functions. The interesting question isn't whether debt will ever disappear, it's how long this arrangement keeps making sense. If you have found this video interesting, consider subscribing. History repeats itself, and it's where insights to our future can often be found.